So, usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there is this like comforting expectation of precision,
Or
right?
yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, well, there it is. There's the problem.
Right, yeah. They can just literally point at the issue.
Exactly. And, we know how to fix it. We know exactly how long it takes to heal, and the entire process is just mapped out for you.
Yeah, it's a very binary system, really. It is either broken or it's not. The problem is isolated, and the treatment pathway is universally understood.
Right. But then you step into the world of youth mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we hear about the youth mental health crisis constantly. We see the headlines. We hear it from teachers. We talk about it with other parents.
It's everywhere.
It really is.
Mm.
And we are looking at this diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. And because there is no clear x-ray to point to when it comes to our own kids, it just feels paralyzing.
Yeah, you feel like you have no idea what to do.
Exactly. We just
Huh.
don't know what to actually do about it. But what if the solution to youth mental health isn't a better diagnostic machine? What if it starts with just asking a teenager about their group chats?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating pivot.
It is. So today we are doing a deep dive into a framework emerging in Georgia schools that takes a single, quiet conversation in a living room and connects it to a massive statewide clinical infrastructure.
Right. So the source material we are examining today outlines something called the MentalSpace model, bridging family and district support
Mhm.
systems. And it is really a structural rewiring of how we handle student well-being. And what makes this particular approach so compelling is how it
Yeah, the
scales.
scale is incredible.
Right, because we aren't just looking at dry policy documents today. The mission for this deep dive is to track the journey of a student from the absolute micro level.
Like how you, listening right now, might talk to a child tonight.
Exactly, from that micro level all the way out to the macro level, looking at how an entire school district mobilizes around that single conversation.
Okay, let's unpack this
Yeah.
because we're going to start with that micro level first. Because, if you are anything like me, most advice for parents on navigating the digital age feels completely out of touch with reality.
Oh, for sure.
We're told we need to monitor everything, understand every single app, and intervene the second something looks wrong. I mean, it feels like we're supposed to defuse a bomb with zero training. We're expected to act like undercover detectives in our own homes.
Yeah, and that is incredibly stressful for everyone involved.
Right. But the source material today offers a completely different philosophy. It offers a low-stakes entry point.
And, the concept of low stakes is the entire foundation of this model.
Okay, see more about that.
Well, when parents try to address issues like cyberbullying or online exclusion, they almost always enter the conversation at a really high stakes level. They have an agenda.
Right, they want to fix it.
Exactly. They want to find the source of the pain and eradicate it immediately. The problem is, teenagers are incredibly sensitive to that investigative energy.
Oh, they can smell it a mile away.
They really can. And their immediate biological response is to just raise their shields and shut down the flow of information completely.
Which brings us to a very specific strategy outlined in the sources.
Hmm.
There is this thing they call the magic question.
Yes, this is brilliant.
It's just a single question that parents are instructed to ask their kid tonight.
Hmm.
And you don't make a big announcement. You don't call them into the kitchen for a serious sit-down talk. You just drop it into a normal interaction.
Just casually.
Yeah. Here is the exact phrasing from the text. Have you ever been in a group chat where someone got picked on or left out on purpose? You don't have to tell me names. I just want to understand what's normal in your world right now.
What's fascinating here is if we really pull that phrasing apart, we can see why it works so effectively on a psychological level.
Okay, let's break it down.
So the framework identifies three specific elements, what the text calls quiet things, that this question accomplishes.
Mm.
Number one, it doesn't accuse anyone. It doesn't put the child on the defensive about their own behavior. And it doesn't accuse their specific friend group of doing something wrong.
Right, it completely removes the spotlight from the child's personal actions. You aren't asking, like, are you being bullied or are you bullying someone?
Yeah.
You are asking about an environment.
Exactly that. And the second quiet thing is that it doesn't require the child to disclose anything personal in their first response.
Which is huge.
It is. They don't have to confess their own vulnerability or, betray a friend's secret to answer the question. They can just speak generally.
Okay, what's the third?
The third element is that it establishes a baseline of safety.
Yeah,
It
right.
basically opens the door for future conversations. It signals to the child that you are aware of the complex digital ecosystem they live in and that you are a safe sounding board for whatever conversation needs to happen, tomorrow, next week, or even 3 months from now.
I just love the psychology behind this. Think about it like wildlife photography,
Oh, I like that.
right? If you stomp into the woods yelling and snapping branches, all the animals scatter immediately. You see nothing. To actually observe what is happening, you have to sit quietly, blend in, and let them come to you. You are literally just asking for a weather report on their digital world.
Yeah.
What's normal in your world right now?
Yeah, and that language is highly intentional. What is normal in your world shifts the role of the adult entirely.
How so?
Well, you are stepping out of the role of an authority figure or an investigator, and you are stepping into the role of a curious observer. You are explicitly asking the child to act as the expert on their own culture.
Oh, wow. That's a huge shift in power dynamics.
It really is. It validates their lived experience. When a child feels like you actually want to learn from them rather than discipline them or fix them, they volunteer significantly more information.
I completely see the logic there. But I do struggle with this next step, the quiet handoff idea,
Yeah, this is where it gets tough for parents.
for sure. Let's say you ask this question. You sit quietly like a wildlife photographer, and the kid actually opens up and implies they are witnessing some horrific bullying. Or worse, they are the target. As a parent, my biological imperative is to fix it right now.
Of course.
I want to know who, what, when, and where. But the source material is adamant that the very next step is not a lecture, it's a quiet handoff to the school. Handing it over to a school counselor feels like I'm abandoning my post. Wait, so if your kid tells you something troubling, you're supposed to just email the school and back off. That goes against every protective parental instinct imaginable.
I know, I know. That reaction is universal, and it really highlights the central tension of the model. The biological imperative you mentioned is fueled by a desperate need to protect your kid.
Right, obviously.
But the model argues that this protective instinct often manifests as a highly emotionally charged investigation. A parent might start demanding passwords, texting other parents, or, calling the school principal demanding consequences.
Yeah, going full mama bear.
Right. But what happens to the child in that scenario? The stakes become astronomical. The child learns that sharing information with their parent results in massive social upheaval,
Oh,
which makes them incredibly reluctant to ever share anything again.
wow. Okay, so the intervention actually burns the bridge of communication. I hear that. But what does the alternative actually look like?
Well, the alternative is the exact family to district handoff pattern. The family raises the flag to the school counselor.
Wow. Exactly.
This might just be a brief email saying, hey, we had a conversation at home, and my child mentioned some severe exclusion happening in a group chat. I'm not investigating it further, but I wanted to put it on your radar.
And the crucial piece is that the parent explicitly steps out of the investigative role.
Yes, because honestly, the parent is fundamentally unequipped for clinical triage. By stepping back, you empower the school counselor.
Who is actually trained for this?
Exactly. Who is professionally trained and naturally integrated into the student's daily routine. You empower them to observe the situation objectively. So the counselor initiates a low-stakes check-in.
What does that look like?
Well, they aren't calling the student into the office for an interrogation. They are observing the student in the hallways, in the cafeteria, or checking in with their teachers. They are looking for specific clinical signals detailed in the text.
Like what kind of signals?
Things like mood changes, withdrawal, sleep disruption, or somatic complaints.
Okay, let's break those signals down because this is where the mechanism of the school environment becomes so important. I mean, a parent only sees a child before and after school. But how does a school counselor track something like sleep disruption or somatic complaints without interrogating the kid?
Well, a counselor has a panoramic view of a student's day. For sleep disruption, they don't need to ask the student. They can simply email the first period teacher and ask, hey, has this student been falling asleep in class lately?
Oh, that makes sense.
And for somatic complaints, which are physical manifestations of psychological distress, the counselor can check with the school nurse. Like, is there a sudden, unexplained spike in visits to the clinic for stomach aches or headaches right before lunch period?
Wow.
Yeah, the counselor can basically triangulate data from across the school ecosystem to build a clinical picture without ever making the student feel scrutinized.
That makes a lot of sense. The counselor's gathering puzzle pieces from different teachers and staff to see if the picture matches the parent's initial flag. But, a counselor can't do this alone.
No, definitely not.
Finding a kid in crisis is only half the battle. The real bottleneck is where to send them next, which is where this statewide rewiring comes into play. Because what happens when that counselor actually confirms those clinical signals?
Hmm.
The traditional system falls apart right at this exact moment.
It absolutely does. Identifying the distress is relatively straightforward, but accessing the care is the historical nightmare. In a traditional model, a counselor identifies a serious clinical need and calls the parents. The parents are then thrown into the chaotic open market of private healthcare.
Which is a disaster.
It is. They have to find a child psychologist who specializes in adolescents, who happens to take their specific insurance, and who actually has availability. That process usually results in a spot on a wait list.
And getting that student into an actual therapy session traditionally takes weeks, if not months. That is a terrifying window of time when a child is actively in crisis.
Yeah, the phrase the text uses is a risk window. When you leave a student in acute distress without clinical support for weeks, the problems just compound.
I can imagine.
Academic performance tanks, social isolation deepens, and tragically, the risk of self-harm escalates. The MentalSpace school model we are exploring today was engineered specifically to eliminate this waitlist bottleneck.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. And the mechanism they use to eliminate it is staggering. If the counselor confirms the presence of clinical signals, they initiate a referral pathway to a partner clinical team that conducts a same-day teletherapy assessment. Same day.
I know. The logistics required to execute a same-day assessment inside a public school are massive. It means the counselor is no longer just a finder of problems, they become a facilitator of immediate care.
Let's explore how that actually works logistically. It's like the difference between realizing a student has a suspected broken arm and just handing their parent a phone book to find an orthopedic specialist who might see them next month.
Good luck, right?
Exactly. Versus having an urgent care clinic built directly into the school corridor. You suspect the fracture, you walk them down the hall, and they are assessed immediately.
And in the MentalSpace model, that urgent care facility is virtual but entirely integrated. The counselor helps transition the student to a private, designated space within the school building. Then the student connects via teletherapy with a licensed clinician who is already partnered with the district, and they conduct the intake and assessment immediately.
And the coordination doesn't stop there. The text highlights that this isn't just a blind handoff where the school washes its hands of the problem and says, we're done here.
Right, it's not a dump and run.
The school counselor and the MentalSpace clinician coordinate the ongoing care plan. And crucially, the family is kept completely in the loop at every step. It is a closed-loop system that collapses the time between a parent raising a concern and a student receiving clinical intervention from several weeks down to just a matter of hours.
And collapsing that timeline fundamentally alters the trajectory of a mental health crisis. When intervention happens in hours rather than months, you prevent the secondary symptoms like school refusal or severe academic decline from ever really taking root.
Right.
But making this a reality for a single student is one thing. Scaling it across an entire state requires an entirely different level of infrastructure.
Which brings us to the macro level of this deep dive. The source material details how the MentalSpace School Initiative is outfitting K-12 schools across Georgia, and the sheer scope of the services is comprehensive.
It's massive.
They aren't just providing ad hoc teletherapy, they're installing dedicated therapist teams for each individual school.
Right.
They implement systemic crisis intervention protocols, suicide and violence prevention programs, family counseling, and crucially, staff wellness support, recognizing that you just can't have a healthy student body if the educators are burning out.
Oh, absolutely. And the personnel matter just as much as the programming. The text explicitly points out that they utilize licensed therapists who are diverse and culturally competent.
Why is that specifically highlighted as a core component of the model?
Because engagement rates just plummet if a student feels their therapist cannot understand their cultural context or their lived experience.
That makes sense.
When a teenager is already hesitant to engage in therapy, sitting across from someone, even virtually, who shares their background or possesses deep cultural fluency, dramatically reduces the friction of building trust. It essentially accelerates the therapeutic process.
Speaking of friction, the model tackles the biggest barrier to healthcare access head-on, the financial logistics. Mental health care is notoriously expensive, and navigating networks can be a full-time job.
It's a nightmare.
The source lists a massive array of insurance providers that MentalSpace accepts: Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, Aetna, United Healthcare, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, AmeriGroup. I mean, instead of forcing parents to play insurance roulette, they've negotiated coverage with virtually every major commercial provider in the state of Georgia.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is an enormous administrative feat. But the most critical detail in that financial framework is what they do for marginalized communities.
Right.
The text notes that services are provided at exactly $0 for students covered by Medicaid.
Wow, that feels like the linchpin of the entire system.
It absolutely is. By ensuring Medicaid patients face a $0 copay, the model completely removes socioeconomic status from the equation of crisis intervention.
Right.
A student's ability to access same-day, life-saving mental health care is no longer dictated by their family's tax bracket. And legally, the system maintains strict HIPAA and FERPA compliance, meaning the firewall between medical privacy and educational records is totally secure, even while the clinician and counselor collaborate.
And districts are highly motivated to adopt this right now. The text mentions that MentalSpace supports compliance with Georgia's HB 268, which has a hard deadline coming up in July 2026.
Yes, the clock is ticking.
For those unfamiliar, HB 268 is a piece of state legislation essentially mandating that schools have comprehensive, actionable mental health and crisis intervention frameworks ready to go. They can't just have a vague mission statement about student well-being anymore.
No more lip service.
They are legally required to have a functional system in place to handle these crises. Districts are racing the clock to implement a working infrastructure.
Legislative pressure is certainly a driver, but the districts are also looking at the concrete outcomes. When a school adopts this specific model, the data in our sources shows a dramatic shift in the student population.
Let's hear the numbers.
They are reporting 89% improved attendance, a 92% reduction in anxiety, and an 85% family satisfaction rate.
Okay, let's focus on the mechanism behind those specific numbers. An 89% improvement in attendance isn't just a byproduct, it is a direct result of the same-day intervention.
Exactly.
When a student is overwhelmed by anxiety, their first coping mechanism is often school refusal. They just stop showing up.
Right, they avoid the stressor.
But by catching that student on the exact same day, the clinical signals are verified, and initiating therapy before the weekend, you interrupt the cycle of avoidance. You keep them in the building. That is how you hit a 92% reduction in anxiety.
Yeah, you are addressing the ember before it becomes a forest fire. And the 85% family satisfaction rate reflects the profound relief parents feel when they are no longer solely responsible for managing their child's clinical triage. The burden is finally shared by a systemic partnership.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? By removing the friction of insurance networks, cost, and logistics, the system ensures that the initial low-stakes conversation at home actually leads to tangible, measurable healing.
This raises an important question regarding how we view school infrastructure entirely.
How so?
Well, it represents a massive paradigm shift. For generations, we have viewed schools almost exclusively as places for academic instruction. The building was a place to learn math and history. But this model suggests that schools are evolving into the primary nodes for holistic community healthcare.
Because it's where the kids are.
Exactly. Because the school is the only place where a child is consistently observed by professionals outside of the home, it naturally becomes the central hub for identifying and treating mental health challenges.
It connects the living room to the clinic, with the school acting as the vital bridge in between. You know, we started this deep dive talking about the paralyzing fear of the youth mental health crisis and that murky, broken X-ray machine.
Right.
But we've seen that the way forward isn't necessarily a technological breakthrough in diagnostics. It's a structural rewiring.
Yeah.
It starts with a parent fighting their own biological instinct to interrogate, and instead asking one simple, non-accusatory question about what is normal in their child's digital world.
The quiet approach.
Exactly. It continues with a quiet handoff, trusting a counselor to observe the subtle clinical signals, like a sudden drop in grades or a trip to the nurse's office. And it culminates in a statewide infrastructure that can launch a teletherapy intervention in a matter of hours, entirely bypassing the traditional waitlist bottleneck.
It is a remarkable chain of events, all designed to ensure that when a child finally signals they are in distress, the system is actually prepared to catch them.
And it all begins with how we choose to enter their world. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've seen how a simple, indirect question about a group chat can unlock so much hidden distress and trigger a life-saving clinical handoff. It makes you wonder what other low-stakes questions might reveal the hidden architecture of a child's daily life that we as adults are completely oblivious to, simply because we are too busy interrogating them to actually listen.